Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. We're waiting for some more people to roll in. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining the Link Center for the Shared Learning Group. We are focusing on supporting someone in crisis today. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to go over just a few housekeeping items while we get started. We do have live captioning and ASL interpreters present today. This session will be recorded, and the recording and the transcript will be shared with attendees. The PowerPoint and the documents that we review today will also be shared with everyone via email. And we welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with others. Attendees cannot see the names of other attendees, and all attendees are muted. You can see the hosts and the panelists. Please feel free to use the chat function in Zoom to communicate with other attendees and the hosts during the webinar. You can use the chat function by clicking on chat at the bottom of your screen. Please do be aware that your name will appear in the chat if you make a comment, but you can change your display name if you want to by clicking on those three little dots next to your name and selecting rename. We will have representatives from the Link Center watching the chat and responding throughout the session today. If you'd like to submit a question or a comment privately or anonymously to the host and the panelist, you can do that by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Following this webinar, you will receive an email with the material that we review today, recording and the transcript, as well as an evaluation that we ask you to please complete in response to today's shared learning group. So at this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Mary Sowers, who's going to start today's presentation. Mary, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you especially to all the folks who are in attendance today. As Stephanie mentioned, this is one of the Link Center shared learning groups. And if you want to go to the next slide, Stephanie, I'll talk a little bit about what our hope is for these sessions. We're really hosting 4 of the shared learning groups each quarter, aimed at different audiences. So yesterday we had the pleasure of hosting 2 meetings, one aimed at direct support professionals and one aimed at clinical professionals who support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities or other cognitive or brain injury and mental health conditions. And today we're really focusing, and most importantly, on individuals and families. So we're really especially grateful that you took time to join us today. We've kept the content of these sessions consistent, but really changing the discussion to tailor it for each audience. And the reason for that is that our hope with the Link Center, which is a federally funded, we're really grateful to the Administration for Community Living for their leadership in this area, but is a federally funded project aimed at improving resources and access to services for people who experience cognitive or communication differences and mental health conditions. So we want to make sure that individuals and families have the information that they need to engage successfully with clinical professionals and to help direct support professionals more effectively support individuals with IDD or other disabilities in the community. So our hope with the sessions is to keep the content consistent so everyone's getting the same information, but that we tailor the conversations in a way that's going to make sense and resonate with you in your day-to-day life. The information that you're going to see presented today is really a collaboration across some really wonderful partners of the Link Center. And it includes individuals with lived experience, people who are researchers, people who work on policy issues, as well as folks who are direct support professionals in different roles. So we're really glad for the breadth of the input that we've had on developing this content. As Stephanie mentioned, we're recording the information. We'll be sharing the transcription of this as well. And all the materials will be available to you after the meeting through an email. And we would encourage you to not only reflect on the conversation that we're going to have today, but to share it with others if you think it will be helpful. And hopefully, come back with additional ideas as you contemplate what you learn or hear today on the meeting. Next slide, please. So I'm actually going to hand off the speaking for a bit to my colleague and we're Monica Wayford. We're so very grateful for Monica joining the work of the steering committee. Monica is a member of our steering committee. And I should have mentioned that the Link Center, the body of work of the Link Center is guided by a steering committee made up of people exclusively with lived experience to really help make sure that the work of the center is grounded in the things that are most important to people who it impacts. And so Monica is going to take us through the next steps. And let me just do a bit of introduction for Monica. Monica served as a community advocate for victims of violent crime with the Central Council Tlingit and Haida Indian tribes in Alaska. She also served as a coordinator for State of Alaska Senior Vocational Services. She's also been a certified peer specialist since 2007. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Monica, and thank you, Monica, for joining us today.
Thank you, Mary. I just wanted to, since we have families today, I just wanted to touch a little bit on what lived experience means. A lot of people who are certified peers have either lived experience in having a mental health disability themselves, or they have a substance abuse problem that they have overcome and are recovering from. And that's some of the lived experience. There are other lived experiences, and it's not always just peer support specialists who are in service to people who are people with lived experience. You will find psychiatrists and doctors and all across the board people with lived experience. So I just wanted to touch on that and let you guys know that. Next slide, please. So at this meeting, we're going to talk about crises and strategies people use to address crises. So we want you to take care of yourself and allow silence to be your safe space. Want you to feel empowered to do what's necessary for your comfort and care. So you may have heard about the 988 crisis line. This is for people who find themselves in crisis, and it's an easy number to remember, 988. You just dial if you need help. This is something new, and we're really glad that it's a nationwide service. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about crisis planning and supports. We're going to talk about how that should be tailored to the person that is receiving services, because one size does not fit all. Next slide. We celebrate our individuality. We celebrate our diverse cultures and our singularities, while we celebrate the discoveries realized in our collective humanity. We know that we are each unique with our own experiences in the world. And I want to tell you about me a little bit before I go on. And it will be great if you could put in the chat if you know who you are, why you're here, because this is shared learning and we want to know who you are also. My experience with crisis has been I've had 2 suicide attempts. 4 actually. 2 were with clinical intervention. So I had a mental illness from the time I was a child, and I can't even remember when I started to have hallucinations in both audio and visual. When I became a peer support specialist, I had come up with a plan, and it was called Prescription Positivity, which is an ongoing process of finding value in life. I found that finding value in life is like discovering new currency. It's a value. It's like what I place the value of having my family around me or my friends near me. Of in America, we're allowed to make our environment what's comfortable for us, make our space personal. These are the things that I hold dear, and these are the things that give me strength, reason, and purpose. When I felt I couldn't go on with my life and I had those suicide attempts, I determined that the reason I couldn't go through with my plan to end it was because I valued those treasures in my life more than I did the prospect of death. So my prescription for finding positivity, and believe it or not, there is some positivity that you can find in the schizoaffective disorders or schizophrenia. It gives you like a cool perspective where you have to look at things honestly because you want to make sure what you're seeing is real. So that may sound strange, but that's who I am, and that's how I became a peer support specialist. I learned that I had the ability to empathize with others instead of sympathizing. And I realized as a peer, I could use those tools that worked for me. And my insight gave me the ability to calculate those tools available for my clients. So with a team's effort or by myself, I could help other people see the worth in their lives. I became focused early on understanding about resources that were within reach of my clients. Customer service for me has always been a priority. And as I developed work ethics, it was important to me to know the benefits of everything a person has to offer. And finding those treasures, those values, give you the reason to go on. So as a practicing peer, when I became certified, it became a delicate balance for me between professionalism and self-care because a lot of times I relive traumas. Sometimes my empathy would trigger my own crisis. My environment can be crushing or it could support me. And that's why this shared learning conference, this opportunity to talk to people about what's going on and how we can help bridge those silos of services, then this for me is like nourishment to my brain and my spirit. Next slide, please. We empathize with experienced traumas that hinder our resilience. Some people have experienced trauma that makes it hard to recover and move forward. Next slide. We listen with open minds. We listen with compassion and most certainly without judgment or blame. Next slide. And lastly, we reject failure and we embrace hope. Next slide. So today's agenda, I'm just going to read this, is to put your name in any group, association, or membership, or just like I said, or just why you're here. We're going to talk about what the Link Center is. I'm on the steering committee. Why are we talking about supporting someone in crisis? What are resources, trainings, and information available to support someone before, during, and after a crisis? We're going to do a group exercise at the end, and we're going to talk about challenges, solutions to supporting people in crisis. This will focus on audience participation and ideas. So what are your resources, your trainings, websites, or places to get information about crisis and planning? Think about this, and we will ask you again at the end of today's session.
Monica, thank you so much for grounding us in the meeting today, and most importantly, about sharing your personal experiences that are are really benefiting the work that we're doing, because you're really able to share such great information and perspective. And as Monica said, we are hoping that this session sort of prompts you to think about things that you need in your day-to-day life, or resources that you're using that have been especially helpful to you. And we'll come back to this later, but our hope with the Link Center and the shared learning groups specifically is that we can identify both things that are available and especially helpful to families as they support individuals with co-occurring IDD and mental health conditions, or things that you feel like you need, and that so we can identify gaps that need to be filled, whether that's through some of our research partners, or something that the Link Center can provide specifically directly. So just thanks in advance for thinking about this. And as thoughts occur to you, feel free to drop it in the chat, but we'll also have an opportunity to talk as a group a little bit later on in the session. Next slide. So you might be wondering, what is the Link Center? The Link Center is a technical assistance and resource center that was funded last year, was our first year, by the Administration for Community Living. And it's really aimed at bridging the gap between mental health systems and systems that support individuals with IDD or cognitive disabilities or brain injury or folks who communicate differently. We know, at the very root of the challenge is that people with those conditions often don't have access to mental health services and supports, even when they need them. And some of that's rooted in payment policies that have gone on for a long time that make it difficult for people with those conditions to access mental health services. Some of it's based in a perception that individuals with those conditions can't also experience mental health conditions. And so we know that there are lots of barriers that have come up in the lives of individuals to get these needed supports. As we were thinking about the project, we recognized, though, that not one organization could do it by themselves, that partnership becomes so important in bridging these various systems. So we're really thrilled. I'm with the National Association of State DD Directors, and we are partnered with the National Association of Dual Diagnosis, or NAD, and the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors to lead the work of this grant. And we have many other partners who have just been instrumental in helping us think through the work of the grant and how it will take shape over the next several years. Most importantly, we've got Green Mountain Self-Advocates, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators, Communication First, the National Center for START Services, the Sonoran Center for Excellence, and the the Ohio State University Nisonger Center. And each of our partners brings really wonderful expertise and also helps us reach communities in a way that gives us a broad reach for the Link Center to make sure that regardless of your background, that you've got access to the information and resources that you need. Next slide. Our hopes for the Link Center are threefold. We hope that we're able to identify barriers in policy and service design and service coordination to spur systems change at the state and federal and potentially local levels. We're hoping to provide resources and tools that can help states and their partners increase direct support and clinical capacity to really build a workforce that can support individuals who are experiencing mental health support needs, both in a clinical sense, but also in those day-to-day interventions with folks. We know that families and direct support professionals play such an important role in helping individuals thrive in their communities. And so we want to make sure that the professionals that help individuals really have a good life in the community have the skills they need to serve individuals effectively. And importantly, very basically, we want to improve service access. Like I said a moment ago, we know that sometimes individuals with IDD or cognitive disabilities or brain injury or folks who communicate have a challenge in accessing the services that they need. And we're hoping that the Link Center can begin to chip away at those barriers to access. Next slide. The key activities of the Link Center are rooted in sort of two guiding principles. We are keeping a very intentional lens on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know that our systems are complex, and making sure that individuals, regardless of their disability, their race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and other factors, everyone can have an equal shot at accessing supports and services. So we're really taking a broad view and trying to reach lots of communities through the work of the Link Center. But we're also really recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and we're building in a continuous quality improvement process so that we can learn and adjust the offerings of the Link Center to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the communities we're hoping to reach, including families and individuals, or most especially those groups. You've met Monica. Monica's a member of our steering committee, and the work of the Link Center is really going to be guided by that steering committee, made up of individuals from across the country with lots of different backgrounds, with different disability experiences and cultural and linguistic experiences and communication differences. And the steering committee has already, in its short term that it's been convened, has already contributed mightily to how the Link Center is thinking about approaching the work as we go through the next several years. And then we'll have, this is our first voyage with the shared learning groups. So our hope is to pull groups of individuals together with the audiences I talked about earlier, both to share information, but also to get information on what's going to be useful to you in your day-to-day activities and in the roles that you play in the lives of people with IDD and mental health support needs. And so, but we're also, as I mentioned earlier, very interested in learning. Is this working? Should we tweak things? So we're really anxious to engage with all of you as we move forward today. And then most, probably at the most broadly based, where we will have a website that will have lots of resources aimed at different audiences. So again, to reiterate, our hope is to have information available to individuals themselves, their families, their supporters, people that are clinicians supporting these individuals. And so our hope is to have a broad base across that website. So we're really aiming to hopefully accomplish a lot in 5 years, but hopefully learn and listen along the way to make sure that it's really hitting the mark for individuals and families most especially. Next slide. So today, what we hope to get out of things is that we'll share some of the work that we're doing at the Link Center, especially as related to supporting someone in crisis. And hopefully by the end of our time together, you'll be able to identify the importance of crisis support and really planning ahead for people with mental health conditions and cognitive or communication differences, and that you'll know where to find resources related to someone in crisis. And we'll be sharing some as we're together a bit more today. But we also are hoping to really get your input on supporting someone in crisis. So if you've had some tools that have worked for you or your family members in the past, information on where we might locate those would be fabulous, or things that we might think about if there are gaps so that we can work with partners to develop things that might be useful. And then we're going to have a group exercise where we're going to talk with several of you on potential solutions on a targeted challenge. So we're really trying to make this interactive and hopefully get a lot of brainstorming going. We're pleased to say that in the meetings yesterday during this group exercise, it'll come at the tail end of our time together today. There was really some wonderful ideas generated, just sparked from a conversation around a particular challenge that was really applicable to the audiences that we were speaking with. So hopefully you'll think about participating in that. We'll be asking for a few volunteers, so just planting that seed now. Next slide. It's at this time, it's my real pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Stacy Nonamaker, who's led much of the work of pulling the shared learning groups together. Dr. Nonamaker is the NASD's Director of Cross System Strategy and is a key Link Center leader. So Stacy, without further ado, thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And hello, good afternoon or good morning to everyone who's joining us. We're so thrilled to have you here and be as it says, be sharing. And I think that bears repeating over and over. Just by way of describing myself, I am a middle-aged white woman. I am wearing glasses. I have brown straight hair to about my shoulders, and I'm wearing a multicolor shirt, blue and greens, in front of a white background. So why are we talking about supporting someone in crisis as it relates to the Link Center and as it relates to people with intellectual developmental disabilities, brain injury, and co-occurring mental health support needs? So we know that people have different experiences, people have different histories and perspectives around the concept of crisis. And I think Monica did such a wonderful job of sharing her personal and her professional relationship to crisis, and really made a case for the importance of talking about supporting someone in crisis. So this is where we're going to kick off the topic that is really centered in this meeting today by asking you all, what does crisis look like for you in your role as a family member? So if you had to pick one word, and we'll even open that up to a couple words, what does crisis, how would you define crisis? What does it look like for you? And again, in your role as a family member. So hopefully getting you engaging in the chat so that we're priming ourselves and getting ready for some engagement later on with our bigger exercise. But I'll be quiet for a moment and let you all sit on this and see what you come up with. Go ahead and drop it in the chat when you're ready. Something needing immediate intervention. Great. When I don't have the resources at the moment to meet the needs of our family. Thank you. Helpless. Yeah. Stress. Yeah, Deb, these are all really great. And as you continue to think about what crisis looks like for you, how you would define crisis, just you can keep putting them into the chat. But really the point here, and wanted to do some level setting, that while crisis can simply be defined as a time when things are not okay, what it looks like, how it's experienced is individual, and it's based on a great number of things, including the role that you play, what you bring to the table, right? So we just, in just the 4 or 5 reactions that we had in the chat, we're seeing, a variety of different ways that people experience crisis, people's relationship to crisis, how they define crisis. So just take a look at those. Even if you didn't put anything into the chat, really think about that for yourself. And again, as we go through talking about crisis, really acknowledging the individuality of our relationship to crisis.
Stacy, we have one raised hand, so wondered if we want to let that person off mute.
Okay, great. Yeah,
have
thank you,
something to
Stephanie. I did
add.
not see that.
Rayan, did you have something you wanted to add? You're on mute now. If you want to come off mute and say something, I'll leave it open for just another minute.
And great. And just as a reminder, as Stephanie mentioned in the beginning, if you want to send something just to the hosts. You can do that in the Q&A, and you can be anonymous there, or if you feel comfortable in the chat, that's fine as well. And raise your hand and we can take you off mute as well. Okay, we'll keep going, and please raise your hand again if you want us to take you off mute. Thank you, Stephanie, for pointing that out. So now I get to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Deborah Peinels, who is a forensic psychiatrist and a consultant to this grant. Dr. Peinels also plays the role of a senior medical and forensic advisor for one of the grant partners, the National Association for State Mental Health Program Directors, and has extensive experience in supporting people with co-occurring conditions, as well as consulting to public systems. So Deb, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. Really excited to be here and to hear the input that you all will be and have been providing. It's just so important that in these shared learning groups that we really do learn from each other, because we don't have all the answers. But I'm going to try and focus on some of the things that we know and some of the things that we still need to learn. So if we could go to the next slide. So let me start by just framing the issue again. I think Monica did a fabulous job framing it, as did Mary and Stacy, but I want to talk about it in terms of thinking about how do we provide the right options for people with IDD and mental health support needs so that they can get supported at every stage of the crisis, for example, from prevention to responding to the crisis, to then what to do after the crisis and stabilization services. And really, we need a lot of trained people supporting individuals who are in crisis. And this is across the board. Many of you may be aware that 988, the recently invoked 3-digit number for behavioral health crisis, went live not just this past July, but the July before. And so we are learning a lot about that 988 rollout and also what it means when mobile crisis teams respond to a scene. You'll see more and more of that, no doubt, in your communities. And we really want to make sure that people with IDD and mental health have the supports that they need. We know today there are too many bad outcomes that we want to erase. For example, inappropriate contact with police that can lead to very scary situations. We know that people end up in emergency rooms. And of course, when somebody needs an emergency room, that's a very important part of our care continuum, but it's not a place where people need to be when they don't need to be. And we know psychiatric hospitalization is also very important when people need it and the right type of hospitalization. But when people don't need it, we don't want them to be in places where they're not going to get the help that they need. So we know that, people with IDD and mental health support needs are disproportionately held in emergency departments for a long time, trying to access other levels of care. And we really want to build more connections to supports in the community along this crisis continuum and beyond. And that we really believe is the remedy for some of the challenges that we're having. Building out more adept, capable mobile crisis teams, for example, who can come to the home that don't need police involvement when there's not a real safety or criminal issue at play. So we want the better responses as much as possible. And that's what we want to learn from you about in terms of your experience and your needs. Next slide. So there's not a lot of research about how to best help the population that we're talking about, but there are some studies, and I want to just go over a few of the highlights that we've seen from an extensive literature review. One series of studies talked about the importance of coming together and supporting and educating people who work at hospitals, if hospitals are the place where people are going to end up, to better understand and get more comfortable talking to and caring for people with IDD. I work in psychiatric emergency room, in a psychiatric emergency room setting. And this is a very true statement from my personal experience of people just not, the staff not really having the education or experience they need to help people with IDD all too often. A paper I wrote with my colleague, Dr. Matthew Edwards in 2020, really also looked at the literature and said, we really need to educate people and learn the best ways about person-centered supports in a crisis setting. And that recognizing that every person is different and has unique needs, crisis care needs to reflect how do we best support people with those unique needs. Next slide. Another study to highlight showed that some things can make people more likely to end up in the hospital for a mental health crisis. Things like how their disability affects them, if it does tilt them more towards an emotional crisis, especially if supports are, changed in an instant, which is often a reason why somebody might have more demand on them than they are capable of handling, and putting them in a helpless, stressful, fearful situation, as we saw from the people putting in the chat how they see crisis. Also, whether they live in a community or a group home setting may make them more likely to show up in a hospital. Whether they've been to the hospital for a mental health crisis before, we know if you've been to the hospital once, you're more likely to go a second time, and whether police have been involved, because very often that is one of the ways that police have handled a crisis for people with IDD and mental health, is bringing them to a hospital or putting them in criminal custody, which is obviously another really problematic response if it's not appropriate. Other things can make it easier to stay out of the hospital during a mental health crisis, like having a family doctor who really understands and can support the individual, and or having a crisis plan. And you're going to hear a little bit more later today about what it looks like, what a crisis plan can look like, and how having that worked out in advance can really be helpful to keep people out of a hospital, because they can predetermine how best to support them during a crisis. Next slide. So there are crisis models that we know are emerging and evolving. The START model is one. Certified community behavioral health clinics are another, and there are several others along the way. And these are avenues towards building out services. For example, certified community behavioral health clinics have a unique place now and are expanding with a funding mechanism that allows them to provide care for anyone who walks in their doors for an initial assessment, and to supply crisis services and partnerships with communities in the communities that they are serving. We know from the models and from the examination and evaluation of the models that there are pieces that have shown some success. For example, having system connections, because we know when somebody's in crisis, multiple systems may be involved. If it's a youth, it may be the school system, plus the family system, plus a mental health system, plus the IDD system. We know that when we include behavioral health and physical health together, we can take care of the whole person from a biopsychosocial perspective. And then that physical health need might be really relevant. Somebody might be having asthma challenges while they're having emotional challenges. So we want to address the whole person. We also know that to address a crisis, having many available services is important. People might need food subsidies. They might need transportation supports. They might, something beyond just a psychiatrist to talk to them, or medications or therapy. We really need to think about all the available services that will help address that need for the families and the person who is in crisis. Then, of course, we need our supports to be trauma informed. We know the rates of trauma amongst the population showing up with an emotional crisis or a substance use crisis are very high. They're very high in the IDD and mental health community. And we really want to be able to support people in a trauma informed way. We also want to make sure that in the crisis setting, that when we do evaluations, that we're doing them right, that we're addressing the IDD needs in a way that's accurate. And if we're not, then we want to make changes to how we do evaluations. And these are just some tips of pieces of success that are really being examined and built out as we go, and as we work hard to better develop structures and supports that are not as siloed as they have historically been, as Mary described. Next slide. So what does this research that I've just reviewed mean for families? I would really love it if people could add to the chat what this means for them and whether we've missed anything. I'll go over a few things that we digested from the look at the evidence. But I really think it's important for you as family members to speak up and tell us what you think all this research means for families in your experience in managing crises that have come up. So one of the things we thought is that at times when looking for support for their family member, families may experience a clinician who really doesn't have the knowledge about or experience with IDD. So the family members and the individual feels isolated and like they're not getting help that really does meet their needs. Also, what we think the literature shows is that families have an important role to play in offering information to clinicians when there is a crisis and to help the clinicians figure out what can help meet the needs of their family member, of course, with the person's permission whenever possible and appropriate. Families can be an important support to people because they know the person and what is important to them and for them. And all of this is derived from the science that we've seen, is that the role of families is going to be key. Now, hearing some of how we've digested that, I'm looking in the chat. Is there anything else that comes to mind from people about what all this means for you when you've had to work with a crisis situation for your loved one? And feel free to chime in or speak if you'd rather. Okay, we have someone saying it is also important that a crisis situation not only affects either or acutely or chronically the patient, but also the family system. Crisis typically affects multiple persons. That's a really excellent point. I think the support needs for everyone involved is really key. And I think that's a really, really important point that we didn't put on our slide. So I'm really glad you added that. Anyone else have ideas? All right, well, I will let you still, please feel free to put anything in the chat at any time or raise your hand. I want to take this opportunity now, though, to turn this over to my colleague, Ren Coloni from Communication First. Ren is a program associate with Communication First, one of the Link Center's partners. They developed a guide for people with IDD to learn more about crisis plans using knowledge they've gained from their own lived experience. And with that, Ren, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ren Coloni, and I use they them pronouns. I'm a fat, white, non-binary person with rectangular glasses and soft dark hair, half of it shaved, half of it in a long braid. I'm rocking gently back and forth. I came into this conversation as a program associate with Communication First, a partner of the Link Center. We are the nation's only nonprofit organization, working for the civil rights of everyone in the United States, who cannot rely on speech alone to be heard and understood. Not all people with IDD have speech disabilities, and not all people with speech disabilities have IDD. But across these communities, we have many things in common. The ways we live, think, move, and communicate are so often met with confusion, discomfort, fear, or abuse. And our basic needs, as well as our basic human rights, are not always met and respected. As a result, we tend to carry a high burden of trauma and suffering. Right now, our communities, and our health care systems, are not prepared to help us weather that suffering, or heal from it. The Link Center is doing work that, I believe, will start to change that. As an autistic person with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative conditions, and a handful of other psych disabilities, I know firsthand the importance of this work. In many ways, I've been lucky. I have never been hospitalized or institutionalized for my psych disabilities. Though I am a part-time AAC user, I have never had my voice taken away from me because it was deemed a safety risk, but I do know people who have had that happen to them. And I have a strong support system, able and willing to help me when I can no longer help myself. Many of us, especially those of us who are unhoused, don't have that support system. So, I count myself lucky. But I've also lost months of time to dissociative episodes, months where I could not care for myself or take part in the world. I've had breakdowns in bathrooms and bus stops, in bedrooms and ballrooms. I've hidden common household objects from myself, so I wouldn't end up in the hospital. And I did all of this more or less on my own. Seeking care has never been a real option. Maybe I didn't have the money for the copay. Or a psychiatrist told me he didn't know what to say, and that I didn't need to come back. Or a therapist looked uncomfortable, and changed the subject. All my care has, ultimately, come from me, and from a small circle of loved ones. I have survived, but going through it so alone, has been dangerous, painful, isolating, and exhausting. Despite all of this, I still have enormous faith in the power of mental health care. I spent most of my time in college learning how well it works, when we do it right. And I've met so many professionals who really, truly get it. It's impossible for me not to believe in that potential. But I also believe in the tremendous power and importance of sharing lived experience. When people with IDD, who have been through crisis and suffering, come together to pool our knowledge, we can create incredible change for each other, and for the peers we haven't met, too. A few months ago, folks from NASDs asked Communication First for our thoughts on supporting people with IDD to navigate crisis. I found I had a lot to say. For example, I pointed out that when we're in crisis, the way we communicate often changes. I usually have access to speech, even if I prefer typing. But in an acute and overwhelming crisis, I have no choice but to type, and even then, my words may be slow, or difficult to understand for people who don't know me. Other people I know, no matter how they communicate when they're feeling well, rely on pictures, gestures, or a person who knows them very well, who can help translate. The people supporting us during crisis need to know how to interact with us, no matter how we're communicating. That means that they also need to know how to respond when I do things they aren't expecting. For example, my rocking, flapping, and slapping helps me stay present in my body. We should never be viewed with fear or disgust for regulating during stress. And we definitely shouldn't be restrained, isolated, or assaulted. But for many of us, ableist mistreatment of all kinds is a looming threat, never too far from our minds. We can't afford to forget about it. Here's an example. I wouldn't feel totally safe calling 988, just because of the chance they could call the police, a situation that would involve dire risks to my health, safety, and life, as a multiply disabled person. 988 is doing a lot of fantastic work to make the chance of police involvement as small as possible. Early data suggests that the chance is less than 2%. That is amazing. But I would still feel infinitely safer calling one of the few lifelines that refuses to contact police under any circumstances, like the Trans Lifeline. Even though it might be a lot less accessible, due to a lack of funding. Or, more likely, I might just decide not to reach out to a lifeline at all. In a mental health care system that can be inaccessible, and even hostile, to people with IDD, I feel strongly that one of the best things we can do is put as many tools as possible directly in our hands. For example, having a crisis plan doesn't prevent or fix crisis all by itself, but it can make it so much easier, safer, and smoother. Working with my lived experience, as an autistic person who has been through, and helped others through, crisis, as well as my academic experience with mental health and disability, I took a look at existing crisis plans, and adapted them into a toolkit, focusing on crisis plans. The toolkit starts by explaining basic ideas about crisis in plain language. It offers tips on what people with IDD may want to include in their crisis plans, based on my experiences. It introduces 988 and defines words that we often hear surrounding mental health crisis. And I included 3 crisis plans that I think work well, along with a short version of one I drafted on my own. When I'm in crisis, I need to know exactly what to do. I don't have the energy or brainpower to try to come up with a plan on the spot. For me, a good crisis plan tells me what steps I need to take, and when to take them. It tells people about the kind of care I do, and don't want, and lays a foundation for some of the decisions I would make, if I were in the right headspace to make them. It also puts everything that other people need to know, about me and my disabilities, in one place. I also feel strongly that crisis plans should be adaptable, for many different kinds of crisis. To me, crisis is stress that is unmanageable, overwhelming, and all-consuming, and that also puts me, or others, in danger of some kind of harm. But the results of that stress are different, depending on many factors. My crisis isn't always about wanting to die. Sometimes, like with my dissociation, it's about not noticing I'm alive in the first place, and being unable to care for myself, as a result. Or, it might be a meltdown, a shutdown, autistic burnout, or a response to a trigger. None of these crisis situations is necessarily worse than the other, but a crisis plan can help me, and the people around me, to prepare for each one. This crisis plan isn't based on research, and it shouldn't be taken as medical or legal advice. Instead, it's based on my own experiences with crisis, and my understanding of myself and my community. But, of course, there is no single crisis plan for every person and every situation. Different people need, and want, different things as they navigate their mental health. So, I won't try to offer a one-size-fits-all solution. Instead, I hope this toolkit will guide and inspire people to think about what matters to them and their lives. I hope that people with IDD can feel empowered to talk to people who support them about their mental health and make a plan for the future together. And I hope that people who may not have a strong support network right now will start to feel that they are not alone. Each day, organizations like 988 and local community crisis teams are learning how to support us in ways that honor and respect who we are. And others in the disability community are here for you, too. I think that people with IDD know ourselves best, and that we gather wisdom each time we experience a crisis or go through intense suffering. When we have access to the right tools, we can make the most out of the knowledge we have gained over a lifetime of living in our bodies and minds. And we can begin to make sense of that knowledge to the people who want to help us. This guide certainly doesn't have all the tools we need to heal, but I hope it's a good start. I'd like to thank the Link Center for including Communication First as a partner. If you'd like to learn more about our organization and our work, visit our website at communicationfirst.org. And I'd also like to thank the Link Center's steering committee for the knowledge they're sharing. This is vital work, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. One last thing. To everyone listening who has experienced crisis, I want to thank you, too. I say that the Link Center's work of supporting us is vital, and it is. But the most vital work of all is doing what you can to live and love this beautiful world of ours. Thank you. I'm glad we're here.
And in the spirit of you thanking everyone, Ren, I thank you as well for sharing with us and for the time and thought that you've put into the resources that you described, that you developed for folks. We're going to drop those resources into the chat now. I think between what Ren shared and these resources, there's a lot of recommendations and considerations for us to take into how do we support people, particularly how do we get a better understanding of the best way to support people when they're feeling okay, as Ren said. And the toolkit that Ren mentioned, we're just giving you a quick look here on the slides, but again, in the chat, Stephanie's dropping in the resources. You can download them from there. If you're having problems, please let us know. But the toolkit is really made up of 2 resources. The first one is what to do when I don't feel okay. And this is the robust, the full crisis plan, if you will, that Ren described. And I think about as families and supporters, what a great resource and asset this could be to understanding what people feel they need, particularly if we talk about that and go through something like this crisis plan when they're feeling okay, so that when they're not feeling okay, we know what our role is, right? Sometimes that's something that we struggle with when we're supporting somebody who's in the throes of crisis, or who could really use some support to de-escalate from crisis. So take a look at this crisis plan. Again, it's in the chat. And then the other piece that Ren created and they described really well is the resource of the toolkit, the piece of the toolkit, what to do when I don't feel okay. And these are the big ideas. So it's really breaking down for people, what is a crisis? Why do I need a crisis plan? Who can help me? And that's all in here. And at the very end of this particular resource is a smaller, shorter crisis plan, if you will, for people, something that's more at a glance, that also can be used. So I think these are all really great, viable resources to check out, to consider. As Ren mentioned, they did, a little bit of scoping and inventorying what really is out there. So there's some other templates that are out there that you'll see on your screen now and are also contained in the resources. So when you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to click on these. They'll take you to these other examples of crisis plans. But I think really the intent here is to show you that there's lots of things out there, including the things that Ren developed. And really, if you think about supporting someone as they navigate crisis, part of that is knowing what they need. what they need in the various stages of crisis, what your role is as a family member, as a supporter. So we have, as the Link Center, additional crisis plans identified and additional information around supporting someone in crisis that we will be disseminating as well as part of that website that Mary mentioned. We're also going to be including a crisis plan that was created by Dr. Joni Beasley, the founder of START Services. Deb mentioned that model earlier. And Dr. Beasley will be doing a training for us next month on that particular crisis plan and how you use it. So keep your eyes open for that as well. Okay, we've been alluding to this and mentioning that we were going to do a group exercise with you all, and we did it yesterday with the direct support professionals and clinical professionals as well, and just find it as a really nice way for us, again, to be sort of sharing knowledge, to be bringing in multiple perspectives and structuring our conversation so that, again, we understand on our end what your needs are, what things you're thinking about when you're thinking about supporting someone through crisis. And so what we're going to do is we're going to present hopefully a relevant or at least a relatable challenge, problem, issue. And then we're going to need a few volunteers who would be willing and able to really listen to this particular problem or issue and take it on as their own and think through it. If this were me as this person's parent, what are some of the resources I would tap into? What are some of the things I would be thinking through and how to support my loved one? So really thinking about brainstorming and generating ideas and solutions. So hopefully we'll get a few volunteers who are interested to do that. You don't have to necessarily come off camera. We invite you to if you're interested in doing that. But if you're interested in volunteering, you can raise your hand. You can ask to come off chat. But if you're just witnessing and you're not necessarily volunteering or being, as we call it, the reactor, you can feel free to listen to this issue, this situation, and be putting things into the chat, some ideas, some solutions. We really want to tap into you all who have the experience of supporting loved ones and being supporters, right? So no pressure, but we think it might be helpful for you all to hear the situation that we came up with, that we want you all to react and respond to. And so I'll turn it over to Monica, and Monica will read this particular issue, and then I'll ask again for some volunteers.
Okay, and I just wanted to say I didn't introduce myself at the beginning because I remembered I do have a lot of visually impaired friends who have said when I describe myself, "Oh my gosh, Monica, that's exactly what I thought you looked like," which I didn't understand, but anyway. The exercise is Ronnie is a 16-year-old son and has destroyed the family home twice during arguments. Ronnie has 2 younger siblings living at his house. Child Protective Services warned that they would remove the younger children or Ronnie from the home after he broke the wrist of the youngest sibling when he was angry. Ronnie has been told that he has to stay on his medication because it is the only thing that has helped. Ronnie refuses to take the medication because he says it makes him feel like a zombie. He told you that he smokes weed and it makes him feel better. Fearing the loss of the younger kids, Ronnie is given an ultimatum to take the medicine or leave the home. Ronnie runs away and is gone for days until the police arrest him for selling drugs. What should I do?
Thank you, Monica. So now that you heard the issue, the challenge that we're presenting before you all, is there anybody who's willing to come on up and have a conversation around what are some solutions? What are some things that we should be thinking of to support Ronnie? Again, just raise your hand or ask to unmute if you're interested in volunteering. And again, we have a small group, so it would be great if people are brave and willing to be part of this. Okay, I'm not seeing, unless Stephanie, am I missing anyone raising their hand or coming off? Oh, I see some. So Wendy, thank you for raising your hand, Wendy. That's great. Anybody want to join Wendy?
Please, I can't do it alone.
So I see people are starting to type in the chat. Maybe Wendy, you and I can get the conversation started, and other folks will feel comfortable enough to add to the conversation.
Sure.
So in the chat, someone's saying it's important to understand and support Ronnie's feelings about taking medication. Does he understand the why for the medication use? And does anyone listen to him when he says how the medication makes him feel? Very important to have this conversation with Ronnie. I agree. And go ahead, Wendy.
I was gonna say, I think that's the very first thing that needs to happen, right? Is was he having side effects that were just things he couldn't contend with? Are there other options? Would he be willing to take medication if we could find one that didn't make him feel like a zombie, or better addressed what he hoped to get out of treatment, not just what the people around him think he needs? And then also, would there be other options to deal with some of his anger? I mean, he's 16, right? Sometimes some of those behaviors are part of that strive for independence. So caution with attributing everything to illness or disability.
Yes. And in the chat, going back to the point about talking with Ronnie, mentioning, did his person-centered plan include what he wanted for himself? So I think engaging with Ronnie, talking with Ronnie, as folks are saying, is really important. I think to the point of understanding the why related to medication use or the resistance to using medications, even opening that lens a little wider when we think of why. So, what, just generally, why is Ronnie struggling, right? Not just why is he not wanting to take his medications, but why is he struggling? Are there some other things, to your point, Wendy, other treatment options? But in order to know what treatment what really is, what's really part of this story about how Ronnie's showing up, right? And understanding that. And I think he's a really important person that can be telling us, reporting that.
Yeah. And then I think as a parent too, really need to explore some of these family dynamics. How old are these younger children? And, you know, sometimes younger siblings can be super obnoxious. We've got 3 grandkids, and the 2 younger girls kind of torture their older brother when their parents aren't looking, and he gets in a lot of trouble, and I've had to intervene a couple times, just say, oh, but you didn't see what the girls just did to him while you stepped out of the room, right? So what's going on, and are there ways to provide him some privacy or separation from younger siblings? Maybe have some coping strategies for when they, you know, allow him to take a self-directed time out, or to walk around the block, or you know, have a safe space to be able to tell a parent what's happening. Just curious what those dynamics are.
Truly. And in the chat, that just expanding the conversation around the why, but what are the triggers for Ronnie to react and respond in such a way? And affirming what you said, Wendy, around the younger siblings. There's another comment that came in. Are there other supports that Ronnie receives to help support him to do things that he enjoys in addition to clinical interventions? I think that's really important. I think that we minimize sometimes the power of relationships and how impactful they are to someone's recovery, to someone's, just the way that they show up in the world, and how important it is for people to not just feel safe, but to trust others. So I sometimes think about, and in my own experience, that I've had people in my life that would not take medication from clinicians and clinical practitioners who they did not trust. So just really, I love that concept around supporting him to do things that he enjoys, and how that can also be indirectly related to how Ronnie feels and how he shows up, right?
Yeah. The other thing I noticed in here is that he says he smokes weed, and just devil's advocate, I'm just, as a reactor, as a parent, I mean, in many states now there's medical marijuana, but maybe talk to his clinical practitioner about what are the properties of marijuana that might be helpful. Is there, to kind of explore why might that be helping, and how does that compare, contrast to the medication, so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's great. There's so blowing up right now in the chat. I'm trying to keep up, but question, is he receiving services available even at school? Does his primary care provider talk to him about medication and self-medication? Great comment. I wonder if he has tried other medications, since that one makes him feel bad, right? And just even maybe showing him that people are willing to help him figure it out. If not this medication, is there something else that we can try? I like that. Maybe take a look at harm reduction strategies. If weed makes him feel better, why? In some states where it's regulated and safely dispensed, that might be a real solution. Or are there other medications or activities that give him the same feelings of peace, relief, happiness, or anything else that could substitute? Yep. And that being, again, understanding the why, right? The fully understanding why, what does the weed do for him, right? And how to match that with a replacement or alternative if necessary. Another comment, if there are historical interactions and response similar to this, a crisis plan should be built for future events. Amen. The crisis plan should also include law enforcement involvement, when to call, how to approach Ronnie, how to make their presence in the situation a helpful one, as opposed to a negative one. And I think that is a really great point. I think Ren did such a really nice job of illustrating that. And I know with the efforts through 988 and crisis response, really looking at a crisis continuum and not law enforcement being the people who show up, right? So having a plan, and thank you for really reinforcing that. And that's been what we've been talking about today, is really critical, and perhaps something that Ronnie and his family and other supporters would want to sit down and work through. Comment just came in, the ultimatum of leaving home. Was there an alternative plan for him if he left? Any supports to leave and be successful?
Yeah, I had that same thought, right? Is it really that he's taking the medication, or their behaviors that we, that we are hoping the medication is helping? But so if you can't stay here, let's work together to find a safe place for you to go, so that, running away doesn't have to be your only option. Also concerning about selling drugs. So we might need to find out a little bit more about his circle of friends, and what is his motivation for selling. Is it to get more drugs? Is it money for what purpose? Is it peer pressure? Is it, again, because he ran away, and that was, so there's a lot to be explored there as well.
Yeah. And I want to emphasize the point of needing strategies and places to regulate, to decompress. I think we all do that, right? When things get too difficult, when, we feel like we need to, we need a respite. We need to step away for a while. I think we all have our own coping strategies, and that's such an important piece of crisis planning. Because again, crisis planning is not just when the crisis happens, how do we react, but crisis planning is all of these pieces of, what are good days? What things make me feel good? And if I'm feeling off, or when things are starting to not feel okay, what are some strategies that I have for myself, or ways that other people can support me? So I think that's a really, really great point. Any other thoughts before we wrap this up? This is great. Thank you so much for the interaction in the chat. And thank you, Wendy, for jumping up here with me. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Great. Okay. So really, the intent here was to show you that sometimes if we open the lens and we include multiple perspectives, even though you all may play the role of family members, you all have different experiences and different histories and different relationships, in how you support someone and how you show up yourself. Sometimes we get in our own way, and sometimes we only see one solution, or sometimes we're, as Monica said, because we're in this crisis with the person, it's hard for us to see solutions or see a way out. Or perhaps we come to the situation with our own assumptions and biases, and we frankly get in our own way. So this was just a really a way to illustrate that there's more than one way to come to a solution, and it's a really good exercise of having multiple perspectives at one table. And hopefully something resonated for you. Hopefully you took something away from this situation that perhaps you can use in supporting someone through crisis. So again, thank you to those of you who were engaging in the chat. And even if you were witnessing it, hopefully you really felt the power of the interaction and again, I can't state it enough, the multiple perspectives and how helpful that is to really coming up with a solution, to thinking out of the box and to problem solving and using our communities to do that, right? Okay, so now we're just going to wrap up our time together and remind you all that if you have any resources, trainings, websites, places you go to get information about crisis planning and support, please put that in the chat. Certainly we're going to take any feedback and ideas that you all shared today. We're going to elevate what exists, any resources that you share with us, and really take back to our partners and the work of the Link Center, other pieces that we can think about for action, again, to be as a robust resource nationwide to people, and in this case, specific to crisis as well. So we're really, hoping that the crisis research that we mentioned here and others that we've been targeting and identifying will all be up on our website that's coming soon. We're really looking at targeting resources and information for all audiences, for individuals, for their families and caregivers, for direct support professionals, for clinical professionals, et cetera. While we're still working on getting our website up and running, please feel free to reach out to us. We're at the Link Center at nasds.org. And we have some more shared learning groups coming up. So we'll be holding these quarterly. And there may be some modifications to them in terms of times and things like that. But right now, what we're holding is in January. We're going to pull everyone together and talk more about trauma and supports for trauma. In April, we're going to talk about transition and supporting someone through transition. And we mean across the lifespan and across settings, because we know that can sometimes be a little sticky for some people. And then in August, we're going to be pulling people together in shared learning groups to talk about supporting the whole person, really looking at integrating care and supports. We're looking here at teaming and digging more into multi-perspectives and how important that is to support someone holistically. So keep your eyes open for those invitations. We're hoping to have January's out in a little bit. And you'll be getting this PowerPoint. So these are the resources that Dr. Pinels had mentioned when we talked about the research that is out there. And finally, again, we just want to thank Monica and Ren for sharing their stories and giving us their time and their energy. I again have learned so much from both of them, and they really have been informing the work of the Link Center, along with Emily Brown, who really had been critical to developing this content, but wasn't able to be with us on the meetings today. And of course, all our other partners at the Link Center for contributing to these meetings and this work. So just the last piece of housekeeping, as Stephanie mentioned during the introduction, we'll have a follow-up email to you all with the resources that we shared today, the PowerPoint, the recording and transcription, and also an evaluation. So here's our plea for please. You already gave us so much time just being up here with us today, but if you could take just a little bit more time and complete the evaluation. We acknowledge that these shared learning groups are evolving based upon the needs of the communities. So Please fill out the evaluation. We're going to take a good look at those and help us inform how these shared learning groups can be beneficial to you all and meet your needs. And, again, thank you for being here. Just a reminder that, you need to also take care of you and, engage in self-care as much as you can. We know that some days are harder than others. So we appreciate what you do. We appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. So have a great rest of your day.